So let's say you have a person named Bob. And Bob goes into a grocery store, and the first thing he does when he walks into this grocery store is he takes off his shoes. And then he runs down the aisle pulling cans off the shelf, and he sings really loud as he goes up and down the aisles. My question for you is this abnormal? And that's what we're going to be talking about today is abnormal behavior. So we have to ask ourselves, okay, well, what is abnormal behavior? Is Bob's behavior abnormal? Let me ask you this. Is Bob's behavior abnormal everywhere in the world? Or is there some culture or some country where taking off your shoes when you walk in to a grocery store are normal? I don't know. How about what if Bob is 2 years old? Does that change your opinion on whether or not his behavior is normal? A lot of the things that we're going to discuss today have to do with the context of the situation. And you'll find that as we go through these different criteria, there are always exceptions. And when you're dealing with psychology, there's a lot of gray area. So try to keep that in mind while we go over the criteria for abnormal behavior. So when we're talking about abnormal behavior, what are we talking about exactly? How do you decide if a behavior is abnormal or not? Well, I'm going to give you 4 criteria that are used, and again, there's a lot of gray area and there are a lot of exceptions. So, and we'll go over all of that as we list these criteria. But the first criteria for determining whether something is abnormal or not is you have to ask, does this violate social norms? Or is there a deviation from social norms? That's the more official term, a deviation from social norms. So you have to ask, well, what does society think about this? Let me give you an example. Let's say that you are in New York City and you walk into a bar late at night and you go up to somebody and you introduce yourself and you kiss them on the cheek. That could potentially get you hurt. I wouldn't recommend doing that there. But there are some parts of the world, like in France, or even where I am in South Florida, where kissing somebody on the cheek as a way of greeting or even introduction is really very normal. And so, does society say it's okay to do this? Well, if not, then this could be really abnormal behavior. Going back to Bob, the maybe our 2-year-old, in some societies it would be totally normal for a child to act this way, but in other cultures it could be considered very abnormal for a child to act out, take off their shoes and sing loudly, and it would be totally unacceptable. And it all depends on what part of the world that you live in. The second thing you have to ask has to do with statistical infrequency, and this is sometimes called statistical rarity. And basically, all you're asking is how common is this behavior, or how rare is it, this behavior or condition? How common or how rare? So, for example, you could have an uncommonly low IQ. Someone with Down syndrome could have statistically an uncommonly low IQ, and so that is abnormal. But on the flip side, you could also have an abnormally high IQ. It could be just as improbable or statistically rare to have a high IQ as it would be to have a low IQ. And so some people say that in order for it to be abnormal, in the sense that abnormal behavior in the way that we're talking, it would need to be not only abnormal, but it would have to have like negative effects on the person. The third criteria for abnormality is, does it cause personal distress, or is there a deviation from ideal mental health? And so basically you're just asking, is this condition or is this behavior causing problems, or is the person upset by this abnormality? And this is another one that isn't quite black and white, because there are some people who are having abnormal experiences that are very happy about it. They could be having hallucinations that make them feel great. They could be going out and hurting people and not feeling bad about it. And so, this is one of those, it's not black and white. Just because somebody isn't upset by this behavior doesn't mean that it's normal. On the flip side, you could have something or a condition that could cause distress or that is abnormal, but maybe you choose not to let it bother you, or you find a way to make it work for you. I'll give you an example. I have a friend who he figured out that he only needs 4 hours of sleep a night. And some people are really bothered by this. They go to bed at a, quote, normal time, and they lie awake all night, and then they finally get a few hours of sleep, and then they wake up again, and it's still dark out, and so they lie awake in bed, and they're really worried, and, they keep saying things like, well, I can't sleep at night, I have insomnia. And, you can ask them, well, do you feel rested? And they go, well, yeah. But some people are still really bothered about this. Uh, but my friend, he figured out, well, I only need about 4 hours of sleep. And so he went to bed with his wife at a normal time, like 10 or 11 p.m., somewhere around there. And then he would wake up 4 hours later at 3 in the morning. And he'd sneak downstairs, careful not to wake anybody up. And he would go and he would read textbooks for fun. And he taught himself how to play chess, and he taught himself to play instruments. And basically anything he could learn, he taught himself while everybody else was sleeping. And so, this was abnormal, but it didn't cause him any distress. And so you wouldn't classify it as abnormal behavior. It wouldn't be like a diagnosable condition, from a psychological point of view. And then there are also conditions where it is normal to feel distress, but it's not abnormal. For example, the loss of a loved one. It's normal to feel upset by the loss of a loved one. In fact, I would say that in the context, it would be abnormal not to feel anything, if you lose somebody that you care about. And so you you really have to take this one in context. People feel distress, but again, you have to go back to the other criteria. Like, is it a violation of social norms to feel this way, to feel distressed about this? Or, is it statistically rare? And so, these criteria, they kind of build on each other. So that's important to keep in mind. And the final criterion is failure to function adequately. It's sometimes called maladaptive behavior. Basically, what this means is it hurting somebody? Will it hurt someone? Or is it getting in the way of living your life? Because there are some times when a behavior or condition is technically abnormal, and maybe it meets other criteria, but it's not getting in the way. It's not hurting you. Let me give you an example. So my mentor, actually, he has ADHD, attention deficit hyperactivity disorder, and his mind jumps from one idea to the next very, very quickly. He describes it like channel surfing, like you're just flipping through the channels really fast and not really focusing too much on any one particular thing. But he uses this, and the way his mind works, he uses it to his advantage. So he is an expert witness in a lot of court cases. And he has lawyers who are cross-examining him and trying to trip him up. And but because of the way that my mentor's brain can think about things all at once, it actually helps him. So while the lawyer is asking him a question, he's thinking about, okay, the question that's being asked, and what he knows about the case, what he knows about the lawyer, what he's already said in his testimony so far, what he knows, as an expert, and about human behavior in general. And he can usually figure out what the lawyer who's cross-examining him is leading up to. And sometimes he can derail the cross-examination before the questions have even been asked, because because his mind works so quickly. So that pretty much wraps it up. One thing to note is that a lot of psychologists and psychiatrists will use the multi-criteria approach. And basically what that means is they look to make sure that all four definitions are used, all four criteria are used to help to decide if a behavior is abnormal or not. But like we've seen, a behavior doesn't have to meet all four criteria in order to be considered abnormal.